Hey friend, welcome back to Christian Podcasting Secrets. I'm your host, Tammy Munson, and I'm always glad that you are tuning into the show, especially today, because I want to talk about something that I've been talking a lot about over these last few weeks in different mastermind groups that I'm in, talking with different clients about how they want to experience growth in 2025. And that, my friend, is the power of collaboration, specifically bringing guests on your show and how it can transform your podcast. Now, I know that some of y'all love your solo episodes, and trust me, friend, I get it completely. Sharing your heart and your message is a powerful thing, a thing that we are called to do. But today, I'm going to show you how collaboration can add a whole new layer of depth and richness to your podcast. So let's dive in. Okay, so before we get started, I want to tell you about next week's episode because I'm really very excited about it. It's something that you guys have been asking for, and I finally able to pull it all together with all the tools and resources. And so next week, we're going to be talking about why SEO matters for your podcast. Make sure that you tune in next Wednesday for that. But let's get into today's topic, the power of collaboration. So first, let's look at the big question. Why should you even consider having guests on your show, especially if you're a solo podcaster like I am? I don't really have guests on very often. But here's the thing. Sometimes being a solo podcaster can get lonely. It's just you talking into your mic. Maybe you're looking into your camera. But guests bring fresh perspectives, new energy, and even added credibility to your show. Think of them as your co-laborers in your mission to share God's word and inspire your audience. Because guests bring their own unique experiences. And that's something that a lot of times you can't replicate on your own. Now, of course, you can share stories or tell anecdotes and things like that to convey the message you're trying to get across. But sometimes it requires a guest. Plus, the other thing is when you have a guest on, their voice, their story, their journey can inspire your audience in ways that you alone might not. Now, for my solo podcasters out there, I'm not saying that you have to turn your show into an interview-based show every single week. Nope, that's not what I'm talking about at all. But the occasional guest can breathe new life into your podcast and give you a break from being the one that has to carry the show all the time. I'm specifically talking to solo podcasters today. But if you are an interview-based show, some of these things I'm going to talk about could apply to you as well. So you've decided you want to bring on some guests to your show. Amazing. But before you start firing off those emails, a couple things I want you to think about. And if you have an interview-based show, I want you to rethink through some of these things as well. When you're looking at the people who you want to invite on your show, there's going to be three things I want you to look at. The first is going to be, does it align with your mission? So I want you to ask yourself, does this person align with the heart of what my show is really about? So for example, if your show is about faith-based parenting, inviting someone who doesn't share your values might not be the best fit. It's not about excluding people. It's about making sure that your message stays consistent. There's lots of people I would love to have on this very show to talk about their podcast, to talk about their journey, but they're not the right fit. The second thing I want you to think about is your audience's needs. And this is where knowing your audience and knowing who you're trying to reach is so important. Because as I've said many times on the show, your podcast is not necessarily about you and you alone. So when you're thinking about having a guest on, whether it's for a subject matter expert, or whatever the reason is, first I want you to think about your listeners. What do they need right now? What are they looking for? Are they looking for testimonies on how God has shown up for them in their life? Is it biblical teaching or practical advice? You want to choose guests who can meet those needs. Maybe you're talking about a topic and you need to bring a guest on that knows the ins and outs of that topic. For example, in a few weeks, I'm having one of my good friends on who is a Christian counselor, and we're going to be talking about mental health. And she's also a former podcaster, so she understands those things. So I'm bringing her on the show to talk about some of those things and how we can improve on some of those things. The other thing you need to think about before the email goes out to your guest list is let's think through some of the logistical things. And I know that's not fun, and nobody really wants to think about those things, but it's really very important. You want to make sure they have a quality microphone. Now, it doesn't need to be a Rode, it doesn't need to be Shure microphone, but it does need to be a quality one. And we really don't want to use AirPods or earbuds with the microphone that kind of just hangs there and dangles on the cord. We want a decent microphone, and most people who have been guests before will have some sort of version for that. But it's always a good question to ask them when you're considering them. The other thing is, are they comfortable with technology like Zoom or Riverside or Zencaster or any of the other platforms that you're going to be recording on? Now, you guys know I don't recommend Zoom for recording podcast interviews, but sometimes it's necessary. You know, I always say technology is great when it works. Sometimes it doesn't, and you have to use Zoom. But are they comfortable with using those platforms? Are they comfortable with all of the technology? And then the other thing is, can they commit to the time that it takes to record? Sometimes it's 45 minutes to an hour. Sometimes it's longer than that. Because the last thing that you want to do is schedule someone who is not prepared, is not going to give you good audio to work with before editing, and who just can't deliver on the quality that your audience deserves. So let's switch gears here a little bit and let's talk about the perks, because having a guest on your show isn't great just for your audience. It's also a win for you as well. So the first thing with this is collaboration builds connection. Because inviting somebody on your podcast is like saying, hey, I see you over there. I see the value that you're bringing. And I want to know more about that. I want you to share your story with my audience. And that, my friend, build relationships. I cannot tell you the number of friendships and partnerships that have started with having somebody on the show or being on somebody else's show. And sometimes being a guest on one show leads to being a guest on another or vice versa. So let's talk about audience growth for a second. Because when you have guests on, you're exposing your show to a new group of potential listeners. Now, of course, you're going to want your guests to share the episode that they're on with their own audience. You're going to do obviously the same thing with marketing your show. But then you could also take all of this a step further. If you're on Instagram, you add them as a collaborator to the posts. And then not only does everything show on yours, but it shows on theirs as well. Because sometimes they forget to share on their, whether they're on Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever they are, they kind of forget about it. And so that's one of the really cool things. But it does expose your guest audience to you and the value that you bring. And I like having guests on periodically as kind of content inspiration. So have you ever felt like you're just running out of things to say, especially if you've been doing it for a while? You're like, haven't I covered this topic before? I feel like I'm saying the same thing again. Guests can bring new ideas, fresh ideas, and even inspire future episodes and even future series. It's really a win-win for all. Okay, so let's get practical. How do you invite someone to be on your show So if you've never had a guest on your show before, or nobody's ever really taken you up on your offer to be a guest on your show, how do you do it? How do you do it without it feeling weird or pushy or awkward? Because a lot of times as women, we kind of struggle with those things. So here's 4 tips that you can use to invite the guest without it being awkward. The first is you want to build a relationship first. We're not going to do the cold email or any of that stuff because I'll be honest, when I get that, it's immediately in the trash. Whether it comes through a DM, an email, that is a red flag. No, I'm not doing this. So we want to build that relationship first. We're not just going to slide into someone's DMs like the kids say. I think that they still say that. I'm not sure. My kids are in their 20s. But you want to start by engaging with them on social media. Comment on their post. Share their content. You could even send them a quick message just saying, hey, I loved your recent episode, or I agree 110% about what you said about X, Y, and Z. Start developing that relationship with them. The next thing, when you do reach out, you want to be upfront about what you're asking for because we're all busy. Every single one of us has something going on in our lives that keeps us pretty busy. So we don't want to waste anybody's time, and we want to be honest about what we're asking them. So normally I send something kind of like this. Hey, Ashley, I am a big fan of your work, especially your recent book on parenting special need children. I would love to have you a guest on my podcast so that we can talk about what to do when there's a new diagnosis or how to manage big milestones. So we record on Thursdays. It's usually about a 45-minute interview. And so let me know if you're interested and we can make it happen. Just something really simple, quick and easy, just like that. And so the next step is we want to make it as easy as possible for them to say yes to this. Because once it starts getting difficult and scheduling and all the things, then people are kind of like, this is too hard on them out. At least that's been my experience. So you want to use tools like Calendly to let them schedule a time that works for them. And I absolutely love using a tool like this. We don't have to go through the back and forth of, okay, how about Thursday at 2? No, that's not going to work. Okay, how about Friday at 4? Like, you don't have to have those back and forth emails. Emails get lost, etc. They are able to schedule what they need. You can set Calendly up or a service like it on what your availability is. So they just go ahead and schedule it, and then it can automatically send them whatever else you would like. Sometimes I include a prep sheet so they know what to expect. Sometimes, depending on the type of podcast interview it is, sometimes I'll send a form that they can fill out about questions and things like that. Now, my friends, I put something together specifically for this because this is one of the things when we talk about this in podcast launch coaching is people kind of get tripped up on the words. They tend to either put too much or not enough. So if you're not really sure on how to word your invite, don't worry. I have you covered. I got you. I created an email pitch template for guest outreach. And the best thing about this, it is free for everybody. So all you got to do to grab it is go to wildfirecreativecompany.com/guest outreach guide. That's it. It's a game changer, y'all. So you take this template and you fill it in. You're going to customize it for each guest that you have. It's not going to be the same thing for every, you're not going to create the same email and send it out to your top 10 people you want to have on your show. Nope. Customize to each and every person that you're inviting. So a lot of times when I'm coaching clients through this part, they're like, Tammy, this is great. But then what? So here's a couple of tips for that. You want to prepare thoughtful questions for them. Now, in your best practices or your prep sheet, you're going to ask them to provide the bio and all the things and some questions that they would like you to ask them. And that's great. But you're going to do your own homework on this. You're going to do the prep. You're going to look into their social media and learn a little bit more about their story and their project or their podcast or whatever the area of expertise is. And you're going to want to prepare questions that are going to let them shine. But we're not talking about like softball type questions. And we want to avoid those generic questions like, so tell us a little about yourself, especially after you got finished reading the bio. No, we're not going to do that. Instead, try, so what was a defining moment in your faith journey? And you want to make sure that these questions are not yes and no questions. The other thing is, a lot of times, especially if guests are on the show, and this is the first time they've ever done anything like this, they're new to the whole process. A lot of times I like to start out with a little chit chat, a little girl talk before we get record to kind of make them feel comfortable, especially if you don't know them. And the third thing is you want to let them shine. This is their time to share their heart, to share their expertise, to share their story. So I don't want to listen to figure out what your next question is. I want you to actually listen to what they're saying. And don't interrupt them, if possible, unless it's to clarify or dig deeper. A lot of times people will interject things because the silence is awkward, or they feel like they have to say something while the other person is talking. And if they do get a little off track, you want to right the bus, so to speak. If the Holy Spirit is leading you somewhere and the conversation is really, really very good, go with that. See where it takes you. You don't have to use the interview. So there you have it. That's some thoughts about collaboration in terms of having guests on your show, especially as solo podcasters, because collaboration isn't about growing your podcast. It's about creating a community that reflects God's love and truth. And so don't forget, next week, we're diving into all the SEO things for your podcast. And I feel that's really going to help you grow your show. So if you love today's show, please share it with a friend and leave a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts. Your support means so much to me, and I am so grateful for you tuning in and listening and being a part of this community. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Until next time, I want you to keep sharing your story, keep walking in your calling, and keep your eyes on Jesus. Thank you so much. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you next Wednesday. Bye, y'all.